Is everyone... I'm going to start because we're short on time, so thanks very much for coming. My name's Kieran Merritt. I'm the trade union spokesperson for Another Europe is Possible. And this section is on Brexit and the international perspective.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kieran. And that has reminded me that if you need the benefit of a user hearing aid and you need the hearing loop, there is a hearing loop in this room, and you can see a LSE steward at the back if you're having any difficulties with that.
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Oh, good. Good. So before the referendum, one of the arguments that we came across in Another Europe is Possible was what was happening internationally in Greece, Spain, and elsewhere in Europe. And obviously in Another Europe is Possible, we stand very firmly against austerity and the terrible effects that that's had in parts of Europe where that's been imposed by European Union institutions. But one of the strongest arguments that we had against that was that the organised left in many of these countries was actually with us. And we were able to say that from the start of our campaign, we've had movements from the organised left and political parties actually part of our campaign and on our committees and so on. And we've worked very closely with Syriza, with Podemos, and of course with the Democracy in Europe movement and so on. So from the beginning, we've very much had a sense that our campaign is one that's not isolated in the UK, but has been part of a broader trend. And just as everything that's happened in the UK has been part of political currents which have been going on across the continent, our campaign has also been linked in solidarity with movements on the left in those other countries. And I think, given what we've seen since the referendum from many of our political parties, from even from Remain campaigners, this is very much fallen to us now. This the duty to keep this torch going, to have an international aspect and keep that international dialogue going. And even while the situation post-Brexit referendum may be different in the UK, there may be a different aspect to our campaign than some of the other campaigns on continental Europe, we still need to have that sense of working together and having open borders and that international solidarity. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce this session on Brexit and the future of Europe. I want to introduce our speakers. We have Ella Vine. Ella's the chair of Labour Friends of Poland, and she's speaking on behalf of Labour Friends of Poland and also of Unison, the union, and we've worked very closely with Unison, which has been fantastic. Ella's also chair of the EU Citizens Vote campaign and Equalities campaigner and a Labour Party activist. We've got Marina Prentoulis, who's an activist, a campaigner. She's a senior lecturer in media and politics at the University of East Anglia, and she represents Syriza and is a spokesperson for the Another Europe is Possible campaign. And here on the right, and I should say the spatial right and not the political right, is Antonio Rovira, who is the spokesperson for Podemos, the Spanish party here in London. So I'm going to open with Ella, if that's okay. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello? Yes. Hello. Let me introduce myself. I'm nobody. I have no name. I'm the migrant. I have no voice. I've been asked to speak today specifically on one aspect of Brexit, and it's the aspect that I know best. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. I think that there is one main reason why we've lost the referendum, one key reason. And it is the hate propaganda against EU citizens. That's the main key reason. I think if that would not be happening, and that was many years before we actually were talking, that the referendum was on the table, that was happening. And I think if that would not happen, we would not have a referendum at all. And I don't think that we did enough to stop it, to stop the hate propaganda. And the Brexit vote was just a common consequence, just a logical consequence of the hate propaganda that was going on in this country for quite a few years. It's like from A to B, something is happening and there are always logical consequences and effect from it, and that's what it was. It was not a surprise to me at all whatsoever I remember about 3 and more years ago, I was telling ministers and politicians and journalists that this is what is going to happen if you continue doing that propaganda. If you allow for it to continue, there will be a Brexit. But obviously, nothing happened, and that was completely ignored. I was not only ignored, but I was also blocked from speaking up. Me and lots of my colleagues and friends were not, unfortunately, not too many of us, were trying to campaign to stop the rhetoric and hate propaganda against EU citizens, but that was not enough of us. But that was not only campaigning and speaking up against the ethical reasons for not using hate against migrants, but also the practical reasons. That's what I used to do. For over 3 years, I ran as a volunteer a national charity that was supporting Polish people and families in the whole of the UK. We have helped about 1,000 people and families in absolutely horrendous, horrific situations. And this is what I was trying, and my colleagues were trying to raise with politicians and with journalists, and show that there are practical consequences on everyday people's lives of the policies. Few years before the referendum, before the general elections, the Tories were implementing policies to scrap us from our rights, to make our lives more difficult, and there were just thousands, and there are still thousands of innocent men, women, and children are suffering. I have experienced and witnessed people, children, pregnant women, families with newborn babies, ill, disabled, terminally ill people who were left with nothing, who were basically left to die on the street or starve. And they were scrapped of their rights, and the only reason for that was because they were EU migrants. And this is something that was really not spoken about, and that really relates still to the post-Brexit, post-vote Brexit issue. And I'm going to come to that. Is that migrants, especially in this context, EU citizens are being used, are being used, and will be used as ammunition, as just a playing card. And that's why we've lost the referendum, which was just rather common logic to me, and it was something I could predict years ago. And now the talk about EU migrants have changed a little bit. It's more positive, which I think it's quite good, because we obviously have the two camps. We have the pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit camp, and now suddenly people, they will be journalists and politicians who did not speak positively or who did not stand up for EU citizens. Now suddenly they're speaking up for us, which is strange. It's good, but obviously it's quite obvious for me why it is happening. It is happening because of Brexit. So again, EU citizens are being used just as a card, in this game, I'd say. But what it shows that there is something positive we can do about that. We can use the situation that is now as a momentum to create change, because Brexit, it's a very, very big issue. It will be for the next few years. Everyone will be talking about it. So we can try to implement changes, to change the direction. And it's not only about migration, but about anything, because it's such a strong argument, and it's good to use it. And another thing, in terms of why EU citizens are being used as a card or as ammunition in this whole Brexit debate, or in politics generally, is that we are not a commodity. I'm not a commodity. We are not labor. We are people. We are humans. We deserve dignity and rights to be protected. Now, the whole talk, as long as we will be talking about people as a commodity, there will be problems as they are now. So we need to stop talking and thinking about them as commodity and thinking about them as full humans with their needs and their rights. And I think that's when there will be changes. Now, there is that Right to Remain campaign. It's done by quite a few different people and organizations. It's quite divided so far. Hopefully, I hope it will be streamlined and a big campaign in the future. But what worries me is that it is still the right to remain. And what about the rights of the people? It's not good enough just to allow people to stay without guaranteeing them all their rights. And I think that Right to Remain campaign is just not good enough. What it should be right to remain, and for the rights to remain as well. Because I don't want to be only allowed to stay here. I want to have all my rights as I enjoy them now, whether it's the right to free healthcare, or if something happened to me or my family, right to any help from the state, for example. So this is a very big issue. So why everyone is campaigning at the moment for right to remain, I'm always quietly thinking this is just not good enough, because I saw thousands of people who were basically left to nothing and left to die because of the current law, and the policies are already very difficult, and EU citizens don't have the same rights as British people. They do once they will acquire something called permanent residency. And I think that is an interesting view to have if we campaign for the right to remain, is for EU citizens who qualify to actually have this automatic permanent residency, or whatever that will work. And now this is an interesting initiative done by Tom Brake MP, and he is not a left-wing MP, but it doesn't matter. And this month he is going to introduce his bill in the Parliament for the right to remain of EU citizens, and for them to have permanent residency. That would mean, hopefully that's what is going to mean, that they will enjoy the full rights as they have now, because that is what is really, really important. And so I want to encourage all of you to support that, and to write to your MPs and to speak to MPs so that they will vote for that bill. And just a final note is that we've lost the referendum, and the migration agenda is kind of lost, especially if I'm talking now about the context of EU migrants, because they are quite new, so they're not well organized yet. Is that because they cannot, or we cannot just win that campaign ourselves. We are too weak. Migrants are the weakest link in the society, and it's just impossible. So we need everyone to, especially British people, to campaign for our rights and to stand up with us. This is how we will win, and this is not only how we will win this migration campaign, any sort of campaign, whether we're talking about disabled people or workers on low pay. I mean, those different groups of people are really weak. They don't have a voice. So we need everyone to stand with them. This is how we win campaigns, and I just hope that this is something you'll take from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella. Thank you. So I'm going to turn next to Antonio, who, as I said, represents Podemos in London. So over to you.
Hello. Is it working? Can you hear me?
Take this.
This one's working.
All right. Hello. No, it's better. As I have said, my name is Antonio. I'm one of the representatives of Podemos in London. And I wanted to thank Another Europe is Possible for organizing this event, which is very much needed right now. And thank you to Luke to give me the opportunity to come here and speak on it. I think the outcome of the referendum is just another symptom of a European crisis. And I think we can all agree that Europe is experiencing a crisis of economic crisis, political crisis, a social crisis. But I'm very interested on pointing out that it is also an identitarian crisis of Europe. And I think it's very important to analyze that because it's very related to what happened on referendum day. I think since the 2007-2008 crisis and on the years after that, we've seen a European Union that has acted in a way that is betraying its own values, and it's not the European Union that we thought we were in. The imposition of austerity measures to most of the European countries in detriment of the majority of its citizens, or the management of the refugee crisis, the appalling management of the refugee crisis, or the deal done with Turkey, which puts a price on human beings, or even the economic coup d'etat done to the Greek government and the Greek people. But also the TTIP agreement, which is being still negotiated now, even though thousands of people already manifested on the streets and protested against it. I think all that has rendered a European Union that is just not what we thought it was. But the European Union is not a static organization. It adapts and it moves, and sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worse. And it actually is up to us to vote the parties that we want us to represent us in these institutions. So when we say that we have an identitarian crisis in Europe, its origin actually starts within the political systems in the European countries. And I think that crisis is a crisis of political representation. After the economic crisis and the years after that, we have seen a majority, social working class majority, that were impoverished and unprotected. And when they turned for political representation and political protection, they found nothing. And partially because the parties that claimed to be the representatives of that class were accomplices on the policies that actually produced the crisis in the first place, and therefore they couldn't really represent that class anymore. So what we have is a vacuum, a political vacuum, or a space that is not being represented, a political space that is unoccupied. And I think the Spanish example is very illustrative of the existence of such a majority. What happened on the 15th of May 2011, and that was before Podemos was even born or even the Occupy movement, a strike was called upon against the government and against the crisis somehow, and thousands of people occupied the main square in Madrid. Then it became national, and in the most important cities of Madrid, most of the people came on the street and camped on the main squares, and what they shouted was really significant. They were shouting, "They don't represent us." I mean, they couldn't have said it more clearly. They don't represent us. There were a majority of people that found themselves unprotected and unrepresented. And I think we all know that Podemos kind of emerged from those squares. And I think what was really successful, that Podemos did, was saying that the crisis is not a force of nature. It's not something that occurs because of some, forces that are out of our control. No, it's political, and therefore it has some responsibles. And they were really efficient on pointing out who were those responsible, the responsible elite that actually were emphasizing that crisis. I think that was really, really important and really successful. Now, I'm talking a lot about Podemos when I have to talk about Brexit, but I think it's very related because Brexit, for me, is a popular mobilization against the establishment. I think that's what it was. The only thing is that it was channeled through a referendum that was controlled by neoliberal and extreme right racist movements. And they control the referendum completely. The whole discourse was upon immigration. But it was the only moment where the people, or this majority, which also exists in Britain, had the opportunity to protest directly against the Brexit. Against the establishment. And that is, if we actually remember, the Remain campaign was backed up by the establishment in Europe and in England, both politically and economically, and they lost. So what we are confronting ourselves with is a new majority of working class people that can actually look to the face of the establishment and say, you don't represent us. So there is an opportunity here, an historical opportunity. And so what can we do next? Well, first of all, we need to acknowledge that there is an international reactionary movement of extreme right, which is organized and united with a common agenda both internationally and in Europe. And we need to acknowledge that. And they are also trying to be the representatives of this new class. And we need to know that that is the scenario where the conflict relies, and that is where we're going to have to fight our fights in the future. So in terms of what to do next, I honestly don't believe that English people are racist. I really don't believe it. British people in general, they're not racist. I've been here for 10 years. I know many of them. I've traveled around the UK. They're not racist. They don't believe that immigration is the source of all their problems. I honestly believe that's not the case. And because I believe it's not the case, if we unite, the progressive forces, if we unite and we put on the table a democratic political strategy or that can be inclusive, I can draw upon rights, equality, and freedom, I think we can win. I honestly think so. And we can see this, of course, is a slap in the face for all of us because we believe that Europe was the answer. Well, we need to look beyond that and see what is always the challenge that lies ahead. And I think every generation has a fight. I think this is our fight right now, and I think it's worth fighting for it. As we say in Podemos, because they're where we are, and because we are, they will be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio. So we're going to go to Marina. Marina, as I said, is one of the Another Europe is Possible spokespeople and also represents Syriza.
And I cannot sit down because I'm going to fall asleep, and we are not going to win if we start sleeping now. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Britain, how I understand it, and start like that. I came here 20 years ago. And when I came here to study, I didn't want to study. Usually what happens is Greeks come here and they study something about Greece. For me, that wasn't very interesting. So instead, I did a PhD in radical ideologies in Britain. And Britain, for me, it's Britain of Thomas Paine. Britain is Britain of the Chartists. Britain is Britain of the Levelers. And now I see nothing of that. And now I see this Britain getting wiped off the map. Now, we talked about referendums, and there is this assumption that the referendums are very democratic and it's about direct democracy. Sometimes, not always. A lot of totalitarian regimes, Pinochet regime, had a lot of referendums. If there is no information, if there is no debate, and if the public is misled, the referendum is not democratic, and this was one of them. Of course, we cannot go against the democratic will of the people. And as the left, we have to look what is the new conjuncture that we are in. And this is a very difficult time. And it will take time to understand exactly what is happening. Because we see a new discourse emerging in Britain. A very dangerous discourse. It's not the old neoliberalism. Cameron was booted out. It's a new discourse, and I believe it's more dangerous. It's social conservatism. It's a government that is saying, oh, but we have to protect the people. And they create the threats of the people. And we are the threat of the British people. I am the threat of the British people. Migrants are the threats of the British people within this discourse. So it is a new dangerous beast that we have in front of us. Of course, when they are saying, oh, but we want to protect the people, they never think the welfare state. They will destroy the welfare state anyway. But we have to remember, it is a new time, and we have to be more clever. New cultural divisions are emerging. Who is us and who is them? Who is in and who should be put it out? And we have to fight against that. Now, where we are, if I have to put a label on that, it's the politics of the Daily Mail. This is where we are. This is a new topic. Of course, being Greek, I feel that I should talk about Greece and I should talk what is happening there. And we started with an idea that sooner or you mean I'm not shouting enough? We started with an idea that progressively the balance of power within the European Union will start changing. And then Greece will find itself with new comrades, and it will try to put pressure and change the neoliberal EU. We are not there. This is not happening. And we see that in Greece we lost, even if we elected a left government, even if we elected a government with a very different program. They crushed us, and now this government is implementing, is administering another memorandum of austerity, of privatizations, of neoliberalism. But still, we have to stay together. There is no way out of that. No one country is going to win this beast on its own. It is at the same time, as we are speaking, we see that one of our hopes, where we were looking to learn, Latin America, is under threat. We see what is happening in Brazil, what is happening in Venezuela, and this bloc that it was giving hope to all of us is under threat. And even that should be our case. We should fight and try to talk about what is happening in Latin America. We have to protect labor rights while we are here. While these discussions are happening, we have to protect, first of all, labor rights. We have to protect migrant rights. And the question that arises is how? A lot of people talk about progressive alliances these days. But they talk about progressive alliances in a very particular way. They talk about trade-offs that they are going to happen between political parties in order to have electoral power. I'm sorry to say that my experience is different. Progressive alliances start from the grassroots. This is what another Europe is. It is a progressive alliance which brought progressive people, EU and British, together to fight, to discuss, to change the dominant discourse that we had in this referendum. Progressive alliances will happen only if we start from the bottom and we go up. It's not only the electoral level, it's the level of us as well. Us, the people, coming together, British and Europeans, to fight xenophobia and fascism, which is what we are facing today. Now, how are we going to go about doing it? Well, the first ones that they are in threat, the first ones that they become the victims of this new discourse of Theresa May, it is EU nationals. Suddenly we have this division and we'll be the ones out. So what I'm calling you to do is British people, progressive people, united with EU migrants, to create a big, organized general strike and fight them back. We cannot allow fascism to take hold of this country, as we cannot allow fascism to take hold anywhere. So I would, if we had to vote, I would vote for that. The most simple and the most difficult. Let's organize, let's strike, don't allow them to create these divisions between us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina.
Anybody wants that?
Is everyone awake? So our last speaker is Srecko. I didn't have a chance to clear any of this introduction with Srecko before this started, so hopefully everything that I've read on Wikipedia is right. Srecko is a philosopher and author from Croatia. He co-authored a book with Slavoj Žižek on What Does Europe Want, the Union and its Discontents. And he's been called in the continental press one of the most exciting voices of his generation, not to raise expectations too much for you. And he obviously represents here the Democracy in Europe movement 2025. So over to you. Thanks so much.
So, hello everyone. As I also come from the Balkans, and as you can see that we cannot sit down quietly, I'll also stand up. I mean, the reason is because we're sitting all day, so It will be just a bit easier. And don't worry, I won't shout, but I hope you won't sleep as well.
You are not going to start with difficult Zizek stuff, are you?
What is difficult Zizek stuff? I guess Zizek is joking.
Bad
also,
Lacan. I'm a psychoanalyst as well.
Let's have this discussion later if we can.
Please.
About Hegel as well, if you want.
Definitely.
So, if there was one thing which always bothered me in Britain, among a long list, it's that most of these discussions in Britain, especially among the British left, are very UK-centric, as if Britain was an island. Well, of course, Britain is an island, but today we don't have islands anymore. I don't think there is something outside of capitalism, and this is the reason why I think also the vote on Brexit was, from the very beginning, ideologically wrong. I agree with my colleague from Greece, and I remember the Daily Mail on the day of the referendum with a big title which said Independence Day, which was, of course, at the same time an advertisement for the second part of the same movie. And as you know, in the movie, the US, the Americans gather because they have an outside enemy. So this is a reason for them to unite. Something similar happened in Britain. The enemy was the European Union and also the establishment as such. But already this title in the Daily Mail was completely wrong, misleading, because there is no Independence Day. Did you see a big change in Britain today? Isn't it still part of the European Union, as we know? Isn't it still part of big secret trade agreements? And it's still part of capitalism. There is one other thing which we can see today. I just came back from the States, where I was last week and where I was following the debate between Trump and Hillary. And something similar what should worry us is happening in the States as well. If you watched the first debate between Hillary and Trump, you could have seen that they actually didn't discuss any important questions. The same happened here in Britain. It was, as Yanis said, passions came back to politics, but it's the passions of populism. Yesterday evening, I think actually it was today because it was very late, WikiLeaks published new documents about Hillary Clinton. Let's hope they will also publish something on Donald Trump. But the thing is actually that we don't need to publish anything about Donald Trump. He's his own enemy. And you have seen it now with the conversation he had recently. But these emails which were published yesterday, these are the emails about emails from John Podesta. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this name. This is the chairman of Hillary's campaign. And they reveal something very, very interesting. So these are finally the documents about the speeches Hillary Clinton gave for Wall Street for $200,000. Only she and Bill earned around $100 million in the last years for giving speeches to Wall Street and so on. And one speech is particularly interesting, and I would like to concentrate on that speech before saying why we think that DM is the answer for another Europe which might be still possible. In one of the speeches in front of Wall Street, Hillary Clinton said that it's her dream to create a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders. Of course, when she speaks about open borders, it's not the same as when we speak about open borders. I want to concentrate on every part of this speech. It won't be long, don't worry. And we won't mention Lacan at all.
Zizek, I said. Lacan, it's a different story.
Okay, let's have this discussion later. I can see when you mentioned Zizek in Britain, I thought he was still popular. What's wrong with Zizek? Okay, glad to hear, I'll tell him. She dreams about a hemispheric common market with open trade and open borders. So what is a hemispheric common market? Last week I had the opportunity to go for the first time to the Silicon Valley, and I think if the left, or anyone who calls himself or herself progressive, doesn't understand what is happening in the Silicon Valley today, we are completely lost. If the left, or anyone who calls himself or herself a progressive, doesn't understand what is happening with technological development, we don't have a future at all. So what I've seen just the day I came to Silicon Valley, the day before, a guy called Elon Musk had a lecture at Google headquarters, a lecture about the occupation of Mars. So they don't call it, we will go to Mars and explore Mars and so on. They even have SpaceX, which is his company, has even t-shirts which say Occupy Mars. And don't be fooled, it's not Occupy Wall Street, they really want to occupy Mars. And this is the hemispheric market Hillary Clinton is talking about. If you read others, for instance, and it's what I try to show is that we are choosing between two evils. One evil is Hillary, the other evil is Trump. It's still a question which is the lesser evil, and I'll try to explain that as well. Maybe some of you won't agree with that. So on the other side, there is a guy who was the founder of PayPal, who was one of the early investors of Facebook, and who is now the boss of a company called Palantir. Remember that name because this is the company which is already analyzing your data and is in very good cooperation with the US deep state and the State Department. So Peter Thiel wrote a book recently which is called From Zero to One, How to Build the Future, where he explicitly says that it's finished with the ideology of competition. He says what we need today is monopoly capitalism. And if you go to Silicon Valley, you will see that this is precisely what is happening with all the startups. In an essay which he wrote in 2009, the same guy, Peter Thiel, said that democracy and capitalism are completely incompatible, that we need less democracy. On the other hand, the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, is now the current. So on the one hand, you have Peter Thiel, who is close to Trump. On the other hand, you have Eric Schmidt, who is the leader of Hillary's digital campaign, and who recently became the boss of a special committee for technological innovation at Pentagon. So you can see that from both sides, these people from Silicon Valley are influencing US politics. And if Trump comes or Clinton comes, this will stay the same. And this is the problem. This is the hemispheric market which is going even to space. When Hillary speaks about open trade, we should speak about the Troika. Not the Troika Yanis mentioned, but the Troika which is represented by the big T's, big three T's. This is the TTIP, TISA, and TPIP. And don't be fooled when Hollande and other leaders, especially in France and Germany, say that TTIP is finished. Remember that next year we have very important elections, and DM will be present there in different forms. We have very important elections in France and Germany. This is the reason why they are now shifting and changing the public discourse on TTIP. The same as Hillary did when Trump was opposed to NAFTA. What's the problem with this Troika? The problem is precisely what Hillary says, open trade. Because this triumvirate, TTIP, TISA, TPIP, will represent 2/3 of the global GDP, more than 50 countries, and it's an attempt of the US and the EU to oppose Euro-Asian integration. Euro-Asian integration was always a problem for the US empire and also a problem for the European Union. You can see that it's already happening. And it is precisely the European Union which opened the space for Euro-Asian integration. If you go to Greece, I had the opportunity to be at Port Piraeus, which is now 67% sold to the Chinese under the Tsipras government. If you go to the Greek part of Port Piraeus, you will find worker strikes all the time. When I was there, the strike was going on already for 1 month. If you go to the Chinese part of Port Piraeus, you will find lower wages, no opportunities for collective bargaining, no trade unions, and so on. And this is precisely how Euro-Asian integration is happening. If you go to Belgrade, to a country which is still not part of the European Union, you will find Chinese capital, Russian capital, Arab capital. They are now trying to build a new Dubai in Belgrade, which is called Belgrade on the waterfront. And our comrades from Belgrade are opposing it and protesting every month with several thousand people on the streets. So you see that it's already happening, and precisely this is, in my view, and in DM's view, I guess, although in DM we differ in different views as well, is a consequence of the austerity measures of the European Union, among other things. And here we come, and I will end soon, to the third part of Hillary's speech in front of Wall Street. which is open borders. When Hillary is speaking about open borders, she's of course not speaking about the borders we speak of. I had the opportunity also to be in the refugee camp in Idomeni and also in Calais in the jungle in the last months. If you go to Idomeni, you will not find refugees anymore. If you go to Calais, you will find, as someone who is working for the Eurotunnel told me, NATO standard fences. And he was very proud to say this is NATO standard fences. You will see, I've seen drones flying around already. So in Calais today, and this is the reason why Silicon Valley is also important, very important today, they're actually building the most sophisticated technological surveillance system opposing refugees anywhere in Europe, which will then probably be implemented also in other parts of the European Union. So why are these refugees in Calais prohibited to enter the highways, for instance? Why is Eurotunnel investing tens of millions of euros? Why is the Eurotunnel trying to use the ISDS mechanism, investor-state disputed settlement, which will be used, which will, with TTIP, become the new rule? Why are there no refugees in Idomeni? Precisely because of the second part of Hillary Clinton's talk, which is open trade. So I spoke to some of the refugees in Idomeni, and they told me, you know why we were occupying the railway? Because it is the railway where the goods enter Western Balkans and the European Union. So 15,000 refugees were occupying for months the railway, and this was, of course, the problem for capital. This was the problem for Port Pireus, this was the problem for the Chinese who want to supply Europe with cheap goods from China. And the same is happening in Calais. The problem is not so much these people, but the problem is that these people are blocking the free trade and open trade, which Hillary is mentioning. So to conclude, how is a different Europe possible? I think the only solution can be, unlike Brexit, a progressive pan-European and a progressive international movement. Since the World Social Forum, and some of us here I can see were part of this process, which was one of the biggest internationalist movements in the 21st century, which unfortunately lasted only 1 decade, and I think it's time to announce the funeral for the World Social Forum, because it's not active anymore, and I think it's impotent. Since it doesn't mean that it was a failure. I think it would be a failure to say that Occupy was a failure, that Syntagma was a failure, and the World Social Forum is a failure, but we have to move a step ahead. And we think in DM that DM is this chance to move a step forwards. Why? If we look at the problems today, if you look at Hillary Clinton's speech, you will see that global capitalism is, as it says, global, and that Britain is actually not an island. So if we want to oppose global capitalism, we can only do it on a global level. This, and this is very important, doesn't mean that for DM, the municipal, local, and national level is not important. What DM is trying to do on the one hand is to combine horizontality, the experience of these direct democratic movements such as Syntagma Square, Puerta del Sol, occupations in Bosnia, for instance. In Croatia, students are again occupying universities, fighting the privatization of education. So on the one level, what we are trying to do is to combine horizontality, but also verticality. The experience of new political parties, the experience which the Labour Party has here in Britain, on the one hand, the Labour Party, on the other hand, Momentum. But what is also important for DM is that we move and mobilize people on 3 different levels. One is the local municipal level, which is the reason why DM is now creating something what we call the network of rebel cities. And we are very proud that, for instance, the city of Barcelona is very close to DM and supports DM. Some of them are even in the advisory panel of DM. Naples, for instance, in Italy, and some other cities. On the other hand, for DM, the national level is, of course, important. This is the reason why also we have close ties with the Linke in Germany, with Podemos in Spain, with the Labour Party here. But what is most important, and I think, and we think this is missing on the progressive agenda in Europe, is the international level. And I think the biggest mistake of Brexit and the biggest failure and the biggest danger would be if the progressives of Britain lose the contacts with the progressives from other parts of Europe. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Srecko. So we'll come to you. Yes, the person there.
Hiya. One of the things that we were discussing almost straight away was how about social conservatism and identity, and probably that the June 23rd referendum really sort of brought home that actually it's not, there are two different versions of Britain that we're living in. The one that we thought we lived in, which was progressive, heading towards a place where it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, your sexuality, your gender, that you had a place in this country. And then post that, there was a realisation that about half the population really thought they were better than anyone else, and that they had this sense of British entitlement and British xenophobia and racism that was really in the heart of society. But my question would be, why would you have two parties that are both trying to get small c conservative Labour voters, basically working class, who have quite retrograde views? Why don't you have a party that instead abandons its, I suppose, economic left wing just to try and get the progressive, socially progressive vote out there, which is basically the 48%? And surely that should be the focus rather than, for the moment, because we're in a crisis, trying to change any kind of, the economy of Europe, the economy of Britain for the future, try and deal with the really awful situation we've got going on now.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Are there any other observations? Yes, the gentleman there with the green scarf.
The proposition I put to this little group was that we're all wasting our time if we're not prepared to challenge the moral legitimacy of the referendum. I'd like to throw that open and see if anybody else wants to take it up.
If I could take a third one. There's the lady there with the... Oh, thanks.
Hi. We work as a movement called Farms Not Factories, and we've been travelling to many, many countries and seeing how giant corporations, particularly in the pig industry, are undermining the village economies all over, particularly Eastern Europe, but all over the world. And many, many people in the villages say, we don't want to leave our village, but the thing is that we no longer have any economy here. And if you go to the cities, you see that the banks are now Deutsche Bank, Citibank, Barclays Bank. You've got the EBRD who's investing in these giant mechanized factory farms where there isn't any jobs. So you've got people coming to the cities and demonstrating and saying, what am I going to do? Commit suicide or emigrate? So actually what I'm looking at is a lot of people don't want to leave. And what are we doing about that?
Okay, thanks very much. So, thanks. So, do you want to react to any of those, Marina?
Yeah.
Sure.
Shall I take this or shall I go there? Paul, I'll start with Paul because he was talking about Ireland and the Irish protests against the borders and so on, yeah? Paul? Talking about internationalism and international movements. And what I was trying to say is that first, where we start from is the one that it is closer to us, the local, the specific problems that we face in Britain in order to expand towards something much bigger and transnational movement and so on. So I don't think we should get into a very vague discussion about progressive politics globally, which I agree with everybody who mentioned that, but I think we should tackle some issues that they have to do with Britain as well. One, for example, issue that we will have to face is if this United Kingdom is going to go on being a United Kingdom, and what will happen with Ireland, what will happen with Scotland, and so on. But in all these discussions, and I think this is part of some of your questions, it has to do with political leadership. What we saw after the referendum is that we don't have political leadership. Everybody, even members of the Labour Party, they jumped on the bandwagon and said, oh yeah, we have to control immigration, this is the problem. This is not political leadership. Political leadership is not repeating to the people some misconceptions they have, that they have been created by 30 years of the mainstream media you have in Britain. Political leadership is taking the people with you and trying to create something better for the future. The lack of political leadership, we can see it, of course, and it became apparent after Brexit within UKIP. We saw the divisions within the Conservative Party, and as a member of the Labour Party, I would say we saw that there as well. I'm totally devastated that in the Labour conference, the Brexit issue was not even discussed. But there was a small opening. They passed a small, how do you call it?
A resolution?
Resolution. Where potentially organizations of civil society, like trade unions, they could be involved within the negotiations. This is now very important for all of us, I think, to take on that, demand that, and push it within the Labour Party as well. So instead of having a negotiation where most of us will be excluded, there are organizations like trade unions, but also within the Labour Party having no discussion, we have to push in having this discussion, in having red lines, in making sure that we protect our rights. Now, in terms of the referendum, I would be very uncomfortable to argue for the cancellation of the referendum, maybe because I'm Greek, maybe because we had a referendum and people try to discredit it, for many, many different reasons. But I do believe that we should have a referendum on the terms, and we should try to have the type of Brexit that it will allow us to stay within the European the economic market. It will protect migrant rights. It will protect labor rights. Now, in terms of these communities, where we see again how we have been separated, saying, oh, but you have metropolitan elites, they don't understand, they're too internationalist, who knows where they come from, and then these British communities that supposedly they were very much into Brexit. We have to start breaking these divisions. But if you don't have a vision and political leadership to go and talk to these communities and explain that it's not migrants, that they are the problem. Neoliberalism has been the problem. They have been building on that in Britain for 30 years. If we cannot pass this main argument to broader masses of people, I don't think we will be able to do anything. So that's why I talked about a migrant strike. With a migrant strike, it will come the idea that this is not the people that they have destroyed British economy. Thatcher started it, and then progressive neoliberal governments has going on excluding this type of communities. But as I said, we should start from understanding the context and the specificity of these questions within the British context in order to expand and create a more global progressive movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonio, do you want to respond to any of those points?
Yeah, I think the lady was talking about identity and how to, there was two societies living at the same time, I think if I understood correctly. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think she was speaking about two societies living at the same time, ones that thought they were better than everyone else, and others that were progressive and inclusive. I think they are all part, in my opinion, and that is not Podemos' opinion, that is mine. I think, in my opinion, both societies that you mentioned are part of an unrepresented society. Brexit didn't mean that UKIP is now the leader that represents this social working majority. It's not true. In my opinion, that is not true. And it's still there. And it's very difficult because they're not demanding something unanimous. They're not there saying something very concrete. They know they are unhappy. They know they are being impoverished. They know they are unhappy and unprotected, but they don't have a discourse that can canalize or direct that anger towards a more democratic, a more inclusive society. And I think that's what we have to do. And the fight is a dialectical fight against these ultra-right movements that want to put the discourse on immigration and how bad immigration and blaming for like all the bads of the society on immigration. Well, we need to challenge that in dialectics. We need to come up with a discourse, and a discourse is at the end of the day a political program that actually draws on, that antagonizes that speech and draws on something more positive. And as I said before, I believe that the majority of the people in England, they would actually rather be on the side of a really inclusive and really positive discourse rather than one that is antagonistic against immigration. That is my own opinion, not Podemos. But I hope that answered your question.
Thank you very much. And Srecko, do you want to respond to anything that's been said there?
Well, I'd rather leave the floor for more democracy and questions, so I'll respond later.
Fair enough. Can I have some more hands up, please? Yeah. So we've got the person there in the leather jacket.
Hi, I'm Kleiner Jordan from Make Votes Matter, and I very much agree with the idea that the referendum outcome was a call for change and a cry to take back control from the establishment. But I think it was actually not just about the establishment in Europe, but about the establishment in the UK, where we've currently got a government elected by just 24% of the electorate, and they are now unilaterally deciding how we're going to Brexit, and their Prime Minister has been chosen by fewer than 200 people. We do not have democracy in this country. Democracy is rule of the majority. At Make Votes Matter, we think that proportional representation would be a big step towards fixing that problem. So we're working very hard to achieve that. And I invite you all to get involved, makevotesmatter.org.uk. But I'd like to hear from the panel about this as well.
Thank you, Kleiner. There's a person there with the black T-shirt. Yeah.
In this group, we did discuss, and actually it was a point made on the declaration itself, which was about maybe unpacking this idea of the United Kingdom as a whole, and clearly stating that in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, as it has been said, and in Wales, there was a mandate to stay. To maybe make that a bit clearer on the declaration itself. So it's and maybe you can also.
Well, just to say, yes, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain. Scotland voted by 65% to remain, and we are sitting here in a sort of British perspective, really. But we need to start unpacking, as you say, the fact that we have England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. Scotland votes to remain. It's democratic. And I would rather have a democratic, not a Brexit, a democratic exit. And that would mean Scotland and Northern Ireland should be allowed to remain in the European Union. I think there is a resolution coming up about that as well in a bit later on.
Yeah. I think if there's something... Is there a person just there on that side of the room yet?
Thank you. There was a very telling line from Owen Jones this morning, I think, when he said something to the effect, every one of us here today must leave owning the campaign. And Marina, in one of her comments, said something to the effect that any real campaign comes from the grassroots up. When we had our little round table here earlier, we came up with a number of phrases, 3 specifically. Loads of small things, which would please Owen. Reclaim language, which might please everybody. Culture from communities, which chimes with Marina. And if I could offer 2 tiny examples from Staffordshire. The town of Leek voted massively to leave. It's a small market town in North Staffordshire. Referendum was even invented. A group of people in that community in a pub one night decided to launch a community choir, which is now branded as Peace Through Folk. Look it up. We sing songs of international solidarity, reconciliation, peace and understanding from all around the world. Our diary, we are swept off our feet in parts of the country who voted Brexit. That's a small example trying to change culture. The second example, which is more substantial, the Raymond Williams Foundation, we've heard other examples where there are small little sparks of very progressive activity. The Raymond Williams Foundation, for a long time, it is an adult education charity aimed at building an educated, vigorously participative democracy. And we run courses at the invitation of pubs full of people, for example, to learn and to teach themselves about progressive issues. And we've already got pub discussions going on 21 different questions that arose from the referendum result, which nobody had thought of before. And these are ordinary people meeting in their pubs to argue the toss in a structured way about what they're going to do now. This is all happening in the north of England. I have lived in London, but I'll stick my neck out and say I bet none of the mainstream media know about us, other than openDemocracy, who are one of our key partners. And within the M25, probably nobody much has heard about these little sparks happening in the north of England. So local communities up, sparks, and all linked together.
Thank you. Can I just maybe need to take one more, and it's probably the last one because we're running out of time. There's a person just over there in the black coat.
Thank you. Just a quick point. I don't know if you've seen in the last couple of days on Facebook, there's something called the Great British Boycott, One Day Without Us, and they're actually calling for a national day of action where people from immigrant backgrounds actually walk out of the NHS or wherever they work. They take their kids out of school, etc., just to make the point how many of them are here, the contribution they're making to society, to their communities as a taxpayer, and so on. So I've actually put it on the hashtag LSE Brexit, so it's worth going and checking that out, because it's like a similar point to the national strike.
Fantastic, thank you. So can I ask, I'm going to go the opposite direction now, so can I ask, sorry?
Yeah, so you
can ask Srecko to respond first this time, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, very short. I'll actually want to add a point about the importance of local communities and the fight on the local level, because I think what these local communities are able to do is very often something what we on the international level or national level are not able to do. Of course, we have to be careful and not to believe that if we act on the local level that we are not involved in global capitalism, because also the local level, as we can see, has many effects of so-called free trade, and also secret agreements will have many effects on the local communities. But what we could have seen since the outbreak of the crisis 2007-2008 is that especially in the countries of the periphery of the European Union, we have many progressive and useful examples of alternative economies. On the one hand, you had the so-called potato movement in Greece, which developed in something which is now much broader than just potato movement. You know how it all originated. There was an overproduction of potato, and the farmers couldn't sell the potato for the same price anymore, and the big supermarkets tried to lower the prices. So what the farmers did is they united and they just started to avoid the middleman. So instead of selling the potatoes directly to the supermarket, not directly, indirectly to the supermarket via a middleman, they are now selling it directly to the consumers. And if you go to Greece, I had the luck to be at one of the markets, which in Athens you have several markets happening every week. You can see that it's not only potatoes, you can buy olives, you can buy soap for instance, from factories which are occupied by workers. And it's better for the producers and it's better for the consumers. At the same time, you have something similar in Spain. You have in Catalonia, you have something which our comrade knows much better, but I will mention it, which is called the CIC, which is the Catalan Integrative Cooperatives, which is a network of hundreds of cooperatives which exist already today in Catalonia, and which even invented a digital currency which is called Eco and Fair Coin, which at the same time it shows that such subversive alternative economies can function inside of the system, be opposed to the system, create a kind of alternative system, and use technology at the same time instead of this kind of technophobian view which is still present among the progressive, so-called progressives. So what it shows is that it's actually possible to build an alternative system inside of this system instead of exiting the system. And yeah, this is just the point I wanted to add, giving some of the points which mentioned the necessity of acting on the local level.
Thanks very much. Antonio, have you got some responses?
I just want to add something very quickly, and I completely agree. It's very important to fight to conquer the commons and take as much as possible things out of the market and out of the capitalist market and create some things in the community, because that's the only way that we can actually oppose capitalism. And if we think about it, capitalism is always against the commons and against something that is not in the market, that is not privately owned. So if we agree on that, then it's always going to be a fight from their side against the commons and for us to conquer the commons and to maintain the commons that we have and create new ones. So it is on those spaces and the local communities where the fight against capitalism is actually happening. Is when you actually fight for the privatization of a space, or when you fight to convert a space through the Neighbouring Act or any other ways, to convert a space into something that is out of the market and is managed by the community. And that moment, that little fight there, I think is crucial as a fight against capitalism.
Thank you very much. Marina, have you got some final remark?
How long do I have?
Not very.
In terms of, we call them sometimes solidarity networks in Greece, but and it is, as you said, so because of the crisis, you have the creation of free clinics in order to deal with the collapse of the national health system. You have wholesale markets, you have cooperatives, and this is still going on in Greece. We have to say that this cannot hold the whole country in the way it is, but it is a very important step, exactly as you said, towards changing these logics. But then again, there are other things that we have to remember, and this is why I started with Britain. The cooperative movement in Britain has a very, very long history. It was a huge movement, and there are cooperatives and projects like that in Britain everywhere, all the time. So we have to remember, and we have to think if they are going to destroy capitalism, live alongside capitalism, and exactly how you are going to use them. That's why when I'm talking about change, I'm closer to Raymond Williams and people like that, because it's about cultural change. Before I come here, I was in another meeting, and somebody was talking about this guy, which I forget his name, but you will remind me. Occupy guy, Giles Fraser. Giles Fraser. And they were saying that he wrote an article the other day, and he was starting from the local, his parish, and he was saying that, oh, but you can have very close-knitted communities, and these are the homogeneous communities. But on the other hand, if you have more heterogeneous communities, then there is not the same effect, there is not a sense of community and stuff like that. This division, what he is, he's a Lexiter, by the way. I don't know if anybody knows me here, but I hate Lexiters. This is the people that I would never, ever again work with. So this has to do with the ecology of the left. There is a left that I think it should go back to 19th century and fuck off, but okay. So he was talking about division again and saying, no, if you want to have this sense of community, you have to have a homogeneous community. And this is where we have as well to intervene, that you can have diversity and close communities, and the one doesn't exclude the other. So these new divisions that emerge in Britain through this discourse, we have to challenge it. This is what we were doing with neoliberalism, trying to challenge some of the common senses, common frames that they were using. For example, in terms of Greece, it was, yeah, but they are all lazy. This is why this happened to them. Pathologizing, moralizing something that it has to do with serious structural problems within the Eurozone. So now we are again called to challenge these frames, but the frames are not static. What Theresa May, and that's what I was trying to communicate, is doing, is something new. It is a new type of conservatism. It is a new type of interventionism. And if you followed her speeches lately, she has very well borrowed the socialist language and brought it into her discourse. So what I'm saying is that we have to be alert. Frames don't stay static, they change, and we have in front of us a new situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid we are running over time, so I'm going to cut it short there. I want to thank Marina, Antonio, and Srecko for speaking. Thank you very much for attending. Ella also gave her apologies. She had to go because of her childcare, and that's our fault for running over, but she apologises, and thank you to her as well. Thanks very much to the panel. So we're going to have a very short break now because we are running over a little bit. So we're going to start the next session at past:30. So thanks very much.
And we are going to discuss psychoanalysis.